Joining us now to talk more on this is Dr. Paul Kershaw himself. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
Now, so let's start with a quick overview of the current state of Canada's housing market, sir.
Well, if you think back to when my mom started in the housing market in the mid-1970s, it took the typical young adult 5 years of full-time work to save a 20% down payment on an average-priced home in this country, whether you're in Vancouver, GTA, or pretty much anywhere across the country. But if you flash forward to today, it now takes over 14 years of full-time work for that typical young person to save a 20% down payment on an average price home across Canada. It's more like 18 in Ontario, 20 in BC. I think it's 24 in the GTA now and 28 or so years in Metro Vancouver. So you have to start saving in childcare. And that's hard to do because childcare is often expensive. And what we're saying is, look, if we really want to restore affordability for all, we need home prices to stall so that earnings can catch up. And we're hoping we can get more and more Canadians agreeing with that logic, and then we can use every toolbox in our policy toolbox to try and achieve that goal going forward. And we're proposing something we know is controversial, a tax on home value over $1 million to help contribute to that end.
All right, sir. So tell us a little bit more about this proposed surtax and how it could help the situation.
Well, whether you're worried about reducing housing unaffordability or wealth inequality, we're saying it's time to protect real shelters much more so than tax shelters. And your listeners might be wondering, what do you mean by a tax shelter? So for anyone who went to work today, 100% of their earnings is going to be subject to tax. If people use some of those earnings to invest in the stock market, 50% of their return on investment from the stock market would be subject to tax. But for anyone who's a homeowner like me, who has their wealth in their homes go up, barely any of that wealth is ever subject to tax. And the moment our policies turn our housing system into a strategy by which people can think, hey, I can get a really good return on investment that I shelter from taxation, we entangle everyday Canadians to bank on high and rising home prices for their wealth accumulation strategies. And that inclines us to be happy and hopeful that home prices will continue to rise and leave earnings behind. But by definition, we then bake in unaffordability for those who follow in our footsteps. And so this tax is trying to disrupt that way in which we entangle Canadians in hoping home prices will continue to rise and rise above $1 million.
All right, so how long would it take for the housing market to cool down if this surtax were to be implemented?
Well, the surtax in and of itself is unlikely to be a panacea, but so long as we tolerate this home ownership tax shelter, which is kind of in many respects akin to an offshore tax shelter. You know, when we have an offshore tax shelter, people move their money offshore to preserve assets. If we have a tax policy encouraging people to move their assets into wealth accumulation via housing, then we make housing a commodity and not just a place to call home. So we know that there would be a dampening influence right away. We'd have to see about how strong a price signal the tax would be, but the revenue we would raise would create about $5 billion a year that we could then invest in deeply affordable cooperative housing and purpose-built rental housing, which is increasingly what is in reach for young, hardworking, talented, well-educated people in our cities across the country.
All right, Dr. Kershaw, just about a minute left here, but another thing to consider is that the average national home price is just a bit over $720,000. So what about Canadians who can't afford homes under $1 million?
Brilliant. And our policy will have a kind of a downward slowing pressure on home prices generally. So hopefully it would kind of cool down the market, you know, even below $1 million. But your point more generally is 90% of Canadians are not going to be subject to what we're proposing. They wouldn't pay a penny more. We're actually effectively asking the 10% of Canadians who live in the most affluent households in the country to show a kind of allegiance to the Canadian dream that a good home should be in reach for whatever someone can earn from hard work, whether in rental or co-op or maybe even in home ownership. And right now, the fact that we have this home ownership tax shelter that we protect and protect and protect, it is actually causing many others to be left on the outside looking in. And so we're wanting to say, let's show more allegiance to accessing real shelters than tax shelters.
All right, Dr. Kershaw, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
You're welcome. Have a great evening.